She was banished after the Duke's betrayal, but every night the forest whispered his name back to her. Lucian, 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 until she pressed her hands over her ears and wept. The forest had become her prison and her confessor, holding memories of the man who'd sworn eternal love before condemning her to this green hell. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the whispers formed words she'd never heard before. His coming, hide or run, his coming for you at last. Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. Ilara Thorne had stopped counting the days after the first year. Time moved differently in the deep wood, the ancient forest that bordered the Duke of Ravensmoor's lands like a dark promise. Seasons blurred into one another. Winter's silence gave way to spring's whispers. Summer's fever dreams melted into autumn's accusations. The trees marked time in their own language, and Ilara had learned to read it in falling leaves and rising sap, in the migration of birds and the hibernation of bears. But she never forgot why she was here. The cottage where she lived, if you could call this survival living, had been abandoned for 50 years before she'd claimed it. Half the roof had caved in that first winter. She'd repaired it with branches and prayers, her soft lady's hands bleeding as she learned to weave thatch and hammer nails. The garden she'd coaxed from the wild earth provided enough to keep her alive. Potatoes, carrots, herbs that grew in the shade. She trapped rabbits and fished the stream. She'd become a creature of the forest, feral and forgotten. Exactly as Lucian had intended when he banished her. The memory still had the power to cut. The trial, if you could call it that. The accusations delivered in his cold, careful voice, the same voice that had whispered love against her skin only weeks before. Treason, conspiracy, attempts to poison his bride-to-be. All lies, beautifully constructed, impossible to disprove. She'd stood in his great hall, surrounded by nobles who'd once smiled at her, and watched him sign the decree of banishment with hands that had trembled only when they'd touched her face. He hadn't met her eyes, not once, not even when she'd cried out his name, breaking the dignified silence she'd maintained throughout the farce of justice. The guards had dragged her to the forest's edge and thrown her across the boundary with orders never to return on pain of death. She'd landed hard, bruising ribs and pride in equal measure, and then she'd looked back, just once, hoping to see him watching from the castle walls. But Ravensmoor stood silent and implacable, its windows dark, giving nothing back. That was 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, and she'd stopped counting the days. Now she stood at her cottage door, listening to the forest whisper warnings in a voice like wind through leaves, like water over stone, like her own heartbeat magnified 1,000 times. His coming. Ilara's first instinct was disbelief. Why would Lucian come here, to the wilderness where he'd sent her to die? He'd gotten what he wanted, her silence, her absence, her erasure from his carefully constructed life. He married his appropriate bride, some earl's daughter with connections and land, and all the things Ilara, a mere baron's orphaned niece, could never provide. But the forest didn't lie. It had no reason to. It had been her only companion, her confessor, the keeper of her rage and grief. It had learned her secrets and given her its own, where the healing herbs grew, where the predators hunted, how to read weather in the behavior of insects and the flight patterns of birds. And now it was warning her. Ilara moved quickly, instinct overriding thought. She gathered her most precious possessions, few enough to fit in a worn leather satchel, the locket her mother had given her before dying, the knife she'd learned to use for hunting and protection, a fire-starting kit, dried meat and the last of the bread she'd baked 3 days ago, a water skin. She was tying the satchel closed when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Impossible. Horses didn't come this deep into the deep wood. The paths were too tangled, the undergrowth too thick. Even the woodcutters who occasionally braved the forest's edges never ventured this far. This was her domain, earned through suffering and survival. But the hoofbeats continued, steady and purposeful, accompanied by men's voices calling to each other through the trees. "The cottage should be near here. Are you certain she survived? 3 years in this God-forsaken place." His grace was very clear. Find her, bring her back, alive. Ilara's breath caught. His grace, Lucian. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to slip out the back, to disappear into the forest that had taught her its secret paths. She could vanish like morning mist, and they'd never find her. But underneath the fear and the fury, something else stirred. Something she'd thought dead and buried under 3 years of exile. Curiosity. And beneath that, more dangerous, hope. She stayed. The door burst open. They hadn't bothered to knock, and 3 men filled her small cottage. Guards in Ravensmoor livery, their fine clothes looking absurdly out of place among her rough-hewn furniture and herb bundles. They stared at her, and she saw shock register on their faces. She knew what they saw. She'd become a woman of the wild, a creature of the forest. "Lady Ilara Thorne?" the lead guard asked, as though he couldn't quite believe it. "Just Ilara," she corrected. Her voice sounded strange. She used it so rarely now, mostly just to talk to the trees. "I have no title here. His Grace the Duke of Ravensmoor commands your presence at the castle." Commands, not requests, not asks. Commands. Ilara felt something dark and bitter rise in her chest. "And if I refuse?" The guard shifted uncomfortably. His Grace was very clear. "You're to return with us, by choice or by force, but you will return." How kind of the Duke to offer me such generous options. The sarcasm tasted like poison on her tongue. "Tell me, is he still married to the woman whose poisoning I was accused of planning? Or did she mysteriously die anyway, making my banishment both unjust and pointless?" The guards exchanged glances. The lead one cleared his throat. "The Duchess Marianne is in good health, my lady. This summons concerns another matter." "What matter?" "His Grace will explain. But we're to bring you back today. Now, if possible." Ilara looked around her cottage, the home she'd built from desperation and determination. 3 years of her life contained in one room. 3 years of learning to survive, to endure, to exist in the spaces between forgotten and dead. And now Lucian wanted her back. The rage that flooded through her was so intense she had to grip the table to keep from shaking. How dare he? How dare he tear her from civilization, throw her to the wolves, literal and figurative, and then summon her back like some hunting dog when it suited his purposes? But beneath the rage, that treacherous curiosity, that dangerous hope. What could possibly drive him to recall her? "I'll need an hour to prepare," she said finally. "We can give you 30 minutes. Then I suggest you wait outside, unless you'd like to watch me change from my exile rags into something more suitable for your Duke's delicate sensibilities." They left, stationed just outside her door like wardens. Ilara moved mechanically, pulling out the one dress she'd managed to preserve from her old life. Simple dark blue wool, carefully stored in a cedar chest against moths and time. It still fit, though differently now. Tighter in the shoulders from work, looser in the waist from leaner eating. She unpinned her braid and brushed her hair with the boar bristle brush that was one of her few luxuries. Then rebraided it, this time in a more complex pattern, not the elaborate styles of court, but not the simple work plait either. Something in between, something that said, "I have not been broken." When she emerged, the guards' expressions shifted again. Perhaps they could see now, beneath the sun damage and the lean strength, the woman she'd once been. The woman Lucian had loved, or claimed to love, before politics and ambition had made her inconvenient. They brought her a horse, not a fine lady's palfrey, but a sturdy gelding used to rough terrain. She mounted without assistance, another skill exile had taught her, and saw surprise flicker across their faces. "Lead on," she said. "Let's not keep His Grace waiting." The journey through the forest took hours. Ilara watched the familiar paths give way to ones she hadn't seen since her banishment. The trees changed gradually, from the deep forest ancients to the managed woods closer to civilization. More light filtered through the canopy. The undergrowth became more ordered. And then, quite suddenly, they emerged from the forest onto cleared land. Ilara's breath caught. She'd forgotten. In 3 years of green twilight and forest whispers, she'd forgotten the shocking openness of fields under sky, the way the world extended to the horizon, vast and exposed. It made her feel naked, vulnerable in a way the forest's close embrace never had. And there, rising from the manicured landscape, like something from a dream or a nightmare, stood Ravensmoor Castle. Gray stone and soaring towers, banners snapping in the wind. The seat of the Ravensmoor dukedom for 6 centuries, repository of power and privilege and all the things Ilara had briefly, foolishly, thought might be hers through love alone. The guards led her through gates that swung open at their approach, into courtyards bustling with servants and soldiers. People stopped to stare. Whispers followed in their wake like smoke. "Is that? Can't be. She was banished. Look at her, like some wild thing. Why would His Grace bring her back?" Ilara kept her spine straight, her gaze forward. She'd survived 3 years in the wilderness. She could survive this gauntlet of curiosity and judgment. They took her not to the dungeons, small mercy, but to a suite of rooms in the east wing. Servants were waiting with bathwater and fresh clothes, their expressions carefully neutral. "His Grace will receive you in 1 hour," the lead guard informed her. "I suggest you make yourself presentable." Then they left her alone for the first time since dragging her back to civilization. Ilara stood in the center of the lavishly appointed room and felt something crack inside her. The contrast was too sharp, from her rough cottage to this silk and velvet opulence, from solitude to servants hovering, from freedom, however harsh, to this gilded cage. The forest whispered even here, a susurrus at the edge of her hearing. But the words were different now, changed by stone and distance. "Careful," it seemed to say. "He wants something. Be careful." Ilara looked at the bath, steaming invitingly. At the dress laid out on the bed, emerald silk that probably cost more than everything she'd owned in exile combined. and she began to laugh. Harsh, bitter laughter that made the servants exchange nervous glances. He'd banished her, torn her from everything she knew, let her believe she was nothing, no one, disposable. And now he wanted her clean and dressed in silk before deigning to explain why. "No," Ilara said aloud. The servants froze. "My lady?" one ventured. "I'll bathe. I'll make myself presentable enough not to offend delicate sensibilities, but I won't wear his silk or his velvet or any costume designed to transform me back into the woman I was before he destroyed her." Ilara turned to face them fully. "Bring me simple clothes. Clean but simple, the kind a housekeeper might wear or a governess. I'll present myself to his grace as what I am now, a survivor, not his doll to dress up in pretty lies." The servants looked at each other uncertainly, but something in Ilara's expression, 3 years of surviving alone against wilderness and despair, must have convinced them. They scurried off, returning with a simple gray dress, well made but unadorned. Ilara bathed quickly, scrubbing away forest dirt but not forest strength. She dressed in the gray, pinned her hair in a simple knot. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone caught between two worlds. Not quite the wild woman of the woods, not quite the polished lady of society. Perfect. An hour later, a servant came to escort her to the Duke's private study. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs as they walked through familiar corridors made strange by time and betrayal. She remembered these halls. Remembered laughing in them, dancing through them, stealing kisses in shadowed alcoves with a man who'd sworn she was his everything. The study door was heavy oak, carved with the Ravensmore crest, a raven above a crown above a sword. The servant knocked. "Enter," came a voice she'd heard every night in her dreams and nightmares for 3 years. The door opened, and there he was. Lucian Ashford, Duke of Ravensmore, stood by the window overlooking his lands. He'd aged in 3 years. Subtle changes that only someone who'd memorized his face would notice. New lines around his eyes, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried and sleep lost. But he was still beautiful, still the man who'd made her believe in fairy tales, still the man who'd destroyed her with calculated precision. He turned when she entered, and their eyes met for the first time in 3 years. The world stopped. Ilara saw shock register on his face, the same shock his guards had shown. He'd expected someone broken, perhaps, someone diminished by exile. Instead, she stood before him transformed by survival into something harder, stranger, more herself than she'd ever been in his gilded cage. "Ilara," he said, and her name on his lips was agony and ecstasy combined. "Your Grace," she replied, injecting ice into her tone. "I'm told you commanded my presence. Here I am. Commanded." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret, but it was gone too quickly to read. "Thank you for coming." As though I had a choice. "You could have run deeper into the forest. My guards might never have found you." I considered it. Ilara clasped her hands in front of her, nails biting into her palms. The pain helped, but curiosity won over self-preservation. "What could possibly drive you to recall the woman you accused of treason? Has your Duchess finally met the poisoning fate you invented for me 3 years ago? Do you need a convenient scapegoat again?" "Marianne is well," Lucian said quietly, "and I didn't summon you to discuss ancient accusations." "Ancient?" The word came out strangled. 3 years is ancient now? 3 years of exile, of learning to trap rabbits and mend roofs and survive on roots and rainwater? That's ancient history to you? Ilara, don't. She held up a hand. Don't you dare say my name like it means something. Like you didn't sign away my life with the same hand that once held mine and promised me everything. Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. Lucian looked at her with eyes that held too many emotions to parse. Regret, longing, desperation, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. I need your help, he said finally. Of all the things Ilara had expected, further accusations, demands, commands, this was not among them. She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You need my help? The Duke of Ravensmoor, in his castle of stone and privilege, needs help from the woman he banished to the wilderness to die. The irony is almost poetic. I know what I'm asking. I know what you must think of me. You know nothing of what I think of you, Ilara interrupted. Because if you did, if you could see even a fraction of the rage and grief and betrayal that lives in me now, you would understand why asking for my help is the most absurd thing you could possibly do. Lucian's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, I am asking, and I'm prepared to offer you anything you want in return. Name your price. Money, land, a title in your own right, restoration of your reputation. Anything. How about the truth? Ilara said softly. Why did you do it, Lucian? Why did you accuse me of something you knew I didn't do? Why did you banish me instead of simply ending our affair like a civilized person? Why did you let me believe you loved me and then tear me apart so thoroughly there was barely anything left to banish? The questions hung between them like swords. Lucian turned back to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I did love you. Because I loved you so much it threatened everything, my duty, my family's alliances, the political stability of the entire duchy. And when I was forced to choose between love and duty, he trailed off. I chose as dukes must choose, and I've regretted it every day since. Ilara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. You regret it. How comforting! Your regret must have kept you so warm at night while I froze in a half-ruined cottage, learning to fear the darkness and the wolves and my own memories in equal measure. I know. You, nothing. But even as she said it, Ilara felt her anger shifting into something more complex. Because beneath his ducal composure, Lucian looked haunted. Whatever had driven him to recall her from exile, it wasn't simple politics or casual cruelty. Something was wrong. Tell me, she said, her voice softer now. Tell me what's happened. What crisis could possibly require my help? Lucian turned back to face her. In the afternoon light, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the weight of sleepless nights written on his features. The forest is dying, he said, and my son is dying with it. Ilara's world tilted. Son? Lucian had a son? Of course he did. He'd married Marianne 3 years ago, shortly after banishing Ilara. It made perfect sense that there would be an heir, a child to secure the succession and justify all the political maneuvering that had made their love impossible. But knowing it intellectually and hearing it stated were different things. I don't understand, she managed. What does the forest have to do with your son's health? Lucian gestured to a chair. Sit, please. This is complicated. Ilara remained standing. I've been on my feet for 3 years. I can manage a bit longer. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Sad, knowing. You've changed. You were always strong, but now there's steel in you that wasn't there before. Exile is an excellent forge for strength. Now, explain. The forest and your son. Lucian moved to his desk and pulled out a leather folder. From it, he extracted several sheets of paper covered in dense writing and crude sketches. 6 months ago, the deep wood began to wither. Subtly at first. Trees dropping leaves out of season, streams running dry, animals fleeing deeper into the interior. I consulted with foresters and naturalists. They had no explanation. It wasn't disease, wasn't drought, wasn't any natural phenomenon they recognized. He spread the papers on the desk, and Ilara found herself drawn closer, despite her determination to maintain distance. At the same time, my son, Thomas, he's 2 years old, began to sicken. Fevers that came and went with no pattern, weakness that left him unable to walk some days. The physicians were baffled. They tried everything: herbs, bloodletting, prayer. Nothing worked. Ilara looked at the papers. They were reports from various experts, all saying essentially the same thing: unprecedented, unexplainable, unnatural. "And you think these two things are connected?" she said slowly. "I know they are." Lucian pulled out another document, this one older, written in archaic script on vellum that had yellowed with age. "I found this in the castle archives. A chronicle from 400 years ago, when the deep wood was first claimed by my ancestor, the first Duke of Ravensmoor." He handed it to her. Ilara read carefully. Her scholar's training, earned in the years before Lucian, when she'd thought education might be her ticket to independence, making sense of the antiquated language. It was a contract, or something like a contract, an agreement between the Duke and something else. The language was vague, deliberately obscure, but the meaning was clear enough. The Duke claimed the land, but the forest claimed something in return: a tithe, a life, a heir bound to the land itself, their fate intertwined with the forest's health. "This is folklore," Ilara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Because she'd lived in the deep wood for 3 years. She'd heard the trees whisper. She'd felt the forest's presence as something alive and aware in ways that couldn't be easily explained. "I thought so too," Lucian admitted, "until Thomas fell ill and the forest began to die simultaneously. Until every physician and scholar I consulted failed to provide answers. Until—" he stopped, struggling with something. "Until what?" "Until the forest started whispering your name." Ilara went very still. "What?" "The servants reported it first. They said they could hear voices in the deep wood calling a name, your name, over and over, like a summons or a prayer. I didn't believe them, but then I heard it myself one night when I rode to the forest's edge, desperate for any sign, any clue. The trees were calling you, Ilara, not me, not the physicians, not anyone else. You." She remembered the whispers, the way the forest had spoken to her every night, growing clearer over time, until she could almost make out words among the rustling leaves and creaking branches. She'd thought it was loneliness making her hear patterns in randomness, or madness slowly claiming her. But what if it had been real? What if the forest had truly been speaking to her? "You think I can heal your son?" Ilara said. "You think because I lived in the deep wood for 3 years, because the trees whisper my name, I somehow have power over this curse or spell or whatever this is?" "I think the forest claimed you when I banished you there," Lucian said quietly. "I think it accepted you in ways it never accepted anyone else. And I hope, that means you can communicate with it, negotiate with it, save my son." Ilara turned away from him, away from the papers and the impossible request, and walked to the window. From here, she could see the edge of the deep wood, a dark smudge on the horizon. Even from this distance, she could sense something wrong. The forest felt diminished, muted, like a voice speaking underwater. "Why should I help you?" she asked without turning around. "You destroyed me, Lucian. You took everything I was and burned it to ash and scattered it to the wind. You made me into nothing. Why should I lift a finger to save your son, your heir, your perfect future with your perfect political marriage?" "Because he's innocent," Lucian's voice cracked. "Because Thomas is a child who's done nothing wrong except be born to a father who made terrible choices. Because whatever you think of me, whatever I deserve, he doesn't deserve to die for my sins." Ilara closed her eyes. She wanted to say no. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to refuse, to let Lucian suffer as she'd suffered, to walk away from this castle and never look back. But she thought of a child, 2 years old, fevered and weak, dying slowly from something no one understood. An innocent. She thought of the forest, her forest, the place that had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. If it was truly dying, that death was her loss too. Her home, her sanctuary, her 3-year companion in exile, all of it withering away. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want everything returned. My reputation, my title, my place in society. I want a public declaration of my innocence. I want everyone who watched you banish me to know it was a lie. Done. I want lands of my own, not borrowed, not dependent on anyone's generosity, mine by right and law. Done. And I want," she turned to face him, "I want the truth, all of it, why you really banished me. What political nightmare I supposedly threatened? Who forced your hand? Everything you've hidden behind duty and propriety and ducal responsibility." Lucian's face had gone pale, but he nodded. "If you save Thomas, I'll tell you everything. I'll give you everything. Whatever you ask, it's yours." "Then I'll try." Ilara moved toward the door, then paused. "But understand this, Lucian. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for that child who deserves better than dying for his father's mistakes. And I'm doing it for the forest that saved my life when you tried to end it. I understand. Do you?" She looked back at him, and for the first time let him see the full weight of her pain, her rage, her broken heart still bleeding after 3 years. "Do you understand that even if I save your son, even if I heal the forest and restore my reputation and claim my lands, you and I are finished? Whatever we were, whatever we might have been, you killed it when you chose duty over love. There's no coming back from that." Something died in Lucian's eyes, but he nodded. "I understand." "Good." Ilara opened the door. "Now take me to your son. Let me see what I'm dealing with." The nursery was in the castle's highest tower, positioned to catch the best light and air. It was a beautiful room, painted in soft colors, filled with toys and books and all the things a young heir might need. But underneath the beauty, Ilara sensed sickness, a wrongness that had nothing to do with the physical space and everything to do with the small figure lying in the oversized bed. Thomas Ashford was tiny for 2 years old. His skin had the translucent quality of someone who spent more time ill than well. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His breathing was shallow, labored. But when Ilara approached, those eyes opened, gray like his father's, and focused on her with surprising clarity. "Hello," she said softly, lowering herself to sit on the edge of his bed. "I'm Ilara." "Lady," Thomas whispered. His voice was thin as spider silk. "The trees said you'd come." Ilara's breath caught. Behind her, she heard Lucian make a strangled sound. "The trees talk to you?" she asked gently. Thomas nodded weakly. They're sad. They miss you. They want you to come home." "Thomas has been saying things like that for weeks," Lucian said from the doorway. His voice was rough with barely suppressed emotion. "The physicians thought it was fever dreams, but now, with Alara here listening to this child echo the same things she'd heard whispered in the deep wood, it was harder to dismiss as delusion." Alara took Thomas's small hand in hers. It was fever-hot, the pulse racing like a trapped bird's heart. But when their skin connected, something else happened, a jolt of recognition, like two pieces of a puzzle clicking together. She gasped. Suddenly she could feel it, the connection between this child and the forest. It ran through him like roots through soil, binding him to the deep wood in ways that were fundamentally unnatural. He was tied to it, his life force entangled with the forest's health. When the forest sickened, so did he. "Oh," Alara breathed. "Oh, you poor thing." "Can you help him?" Lucian had moved closer, his usual ducal composure cracking. "Alara, please, can you save him?" She looked up at this man who'd broken her heart and saw a father's desperation written across his features. Whatever else Lucian was, duke, politician, betrayer, he was also a father watching his child die and was utterly powerless to stop it. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'll try. I need to go back to the forest. I need to understand what's happening, what's causing this." Thomas's connection to the deep wood is real, but it's wrong somehow, twisted, like someone or something is using it to drain both the forest and the child. What do you need? Time, solitude, and permission to enter the deep wood's heart, the deep places where even I didn't dare go during my exile. You have it, all of it. Take whatever you need. "I need you to stay away," Alara interrupted. "Whatever I do in that forest, I do alone. The deep wood knows me, trusts me. It might not react well to the duke who's claimed its lands but given nothing back." Lucian flinched but nodded. "How long?" "As long as it takes. Days, maybe weeks. Keep Thomas comfortable. Keep him alive if you can. And trust that I'm doing everything possible." "I do trust you." Lucian's voice dropped. "I know I have no right to ask, but I do. You're the only person who might be able to save him, the only one the forest will speak to." Alara stood, releasing Thomas' hand. The child whimpered at the loss of contact, and she felt an answering ache in her chest. This innocent boy, caught in the middle of ancient contracts and bitter betrayals. "I'll come back to see him before I leave for the forest," she promised. "But now I need to prepare. There are things I'll need: supplies, tools, permission to access the castle's library." "Anything," Lucian said. "Everything. Just," his voice broke, "just save my son." Alara met his eyes, saw the love there, the fear, the desperation. It would be easy to hate him for this too, for having everything she'd been denied: a child, a family, a future. But looking at Thomas, fragile and fevered, she couldn't find it in herself to begrudge a father's love for his son. "I'll do my best," she said. "That's all I can promise." She left the nursery, left Lucian standing vigil over his dying heir, and made her way through the castle to the library. The castle librarian, an elderly scholar named Master Willoughby, who'd always been kind to her in the days before her banishment, looked up in shock when she entered. "Lady Alara," he breathed. "They said you'd been recalled, but I could scarce believe." "I need access to everything you have on the Deepwood," Alara interrupted. "Chronicles, folklore, legends, anything that might explain the connection between the forest and the Ravensmoor bloodline." Willoughby's eyes widened. "You know about the covenant?" "I know there's a covenant. I know it's killing the Duke's son. I need to know everything else." The old scholar looked at her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Come, there's a restricted section. Only the Duke and his direct heirs are supposed to access it, but given the circumstances—" He led her deep into the library, to a locked door she'd never noticed before. The first Duke of Ravensmoor was obsessed with the Deepwood, obsessed and afraid. Everything he learned, he recorded. It's all here. The door swung open to reveal a small room lined with books and scrolls, some so old they were crumbling at the edges. The air smelled of dust and secrets. "Thank you, Master Willoughby." "Save the boy," the old man said simply. "Whatever happened between you and his grace, whatever injustice was done, Thomas is innocent. Save him, and you'll have this old scholar's eternal gratitude." Ilara spent the rest of the day and most of the night reading. The first Duke of Ravensmoor, she learned, had been desperate for land and power. The Deepwood had been unclaimed territory, vast and rich with resources. But it was also protected. The forest itself was alive in ways that ordinary woods were not. It had a spirit, a consciousness, a guardian. The Duke had made a bargain. He could claim the land, build his castle, establish his dynasty. In exchange, every generation would offer the forest a tithe, the heir's life force bound to the forest from birth. As long as the heir lived, the forest would thrive. And as long as the forest thrived, the heir would be protected by its power. It was symbiosis, balance, give and take. But something had broken the balance. Ilara found references scattered through various texts, warnings about what would happen if the covenant was violated, if the forest was harmed without permission, if the Duke tried to claim more than was given, if the natural order was disrupted. The forest would take what it was owed, and if it couldn't collect from the Duke himself, it would take from the heir instead. Near dawn, Ilara found what she was looking for. A passage in the first Duke's journal, written in his own hand, ink faded but still legible. "The Guardian spoke to me today. Its voice is like wind and water and the whisper of growing things. It told me the price of my ambition. Each generation must honor the covenant or forfeit the heir. Should any Duke forget, should any future lord seek to take without giving, the forest will remember. And what the forest remembers, it collects." I asked what would satisfy the debt if it were ever broken. The Guardian answered, "A life for a life. A heart that understands both the wild and the tame. Someone who can speak for the forest and for the people. Someone who has known exile and chosen to return." Ilara read the passage 3 times, her heart pounding. A life for a life. Someone who understood both wild and tame. Someone who'd known exile. The forest had been whispering her name, because she was the answer. She was what the covenant required. But what did that mean? What price would she have to pay to heal both Thomas and the Deepwood? She closed the journal with trembling hands and stood. Outside the library windows, the sky was lightening toward dawn. She'd read all night, and now she had her answer. Or, at least, she had the beginning of one. Ilara made her way back to her rooms, washed and changed into the simple clothes she'd worn from exile, the ones that felt more real than silk. Then she went to the nursery one last time. Thomas was awake, his fevered eyes tracking her movement. Lucian sat beside the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, looking like he hadn't slept. "I know what I need to do," Ilara said, without preamble. "I need to go into the forest and speak to the Guardian. I need to understand what debt was incurred and what payment it will accept." "The Guardian?" Lucian stood, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "The journals mentioned it, but I thought it was metaphorical, a personification of the forest's spirit." "It's real," Ilara said with absolute certainty. I never saw it during my exile, but I felt it. I heard it. It's what's been whispering through the trees all along, and it wants to speak with me. Then go. Lucian moved toward her, stopping just short of touching. Go, and do whatever needs to be done. I'll wait here with Thomas. His voice broke. I'll pray that whatever the forest wants, you can give it. Ilara looked at him. This man she'd loved. This man who destroyed her. This man who was now trusting her with his most precious thing. And she felt the last of her bitter anger dissolve into something more complex. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Lucian, she said softly, whatever happens in that forest, whatever price I have to pay, know that I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Thomas and for myself. Because the deep woods saved me when you cast me out. I owe it this much. I know. He looked at her with eyes that held 3 years of regret. I know, Ilara, and I'm sorry. For everything. For all of it. For every choice that led us here. Sorry doesn't change the past. No. But maybe, he glanced at his son, maybe it can change the future. If we have one. Ilara had no answer to that. She simply nodded, touched Thomas's fevered forehead one last time, feeling that pulse of connection, that strange bond between herself and this child she'd only just met, and left. The guards tried to accompany her to the forest's edge, but she refused. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen to her alone. She walked across Lucian's manicured lands toward the wild darkness of the deep wood, and with each step she felt the forest reaching out to her, welcoming her home. The trees whispered, "Welcome back, daughter. Welcome back, friend. Welcome back, sacrifice." Ilara stepped across the boundary from tame to wild, and the deep wood embraced her like a lover. The forest had changed in the months since she'd been taken from it. Ilara felt the wrongness immediately, a sickness running through the deep wood like poison in blood. Trees that should have been lush with summer growth stood bare. Streams that should have run clear trickled brown with disease. The vibrant green twilight she remembered had faded to sickly gray. And the silence, God, the silence. The forest had never been truly quiet during her exile. There had always been birdsong, insect hum, the rustle of small creatures moving through undergrowth. But now, nothing. The deep wood held its breath like a dying man waiting for release. Ilara moved deeper, following paths she knew by heart. Her cottage stood empty, untouched since the guards had taken her. She paused there briefly, gathering supplies she'd left behind. Her hunting knife, her flint and steel, a water skin. Practical things that might matter if this journey took days instead of hours. Then she pushed on, deeper than she'd ever dared go during her exile, toward the heart of the forest. The deeper she went, the stranger things became. Trees grew in impossible configurations, their roots knotted together like clasped hands. Mushrooms glowed with faint phosphorescence in the twilight. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on weight and presence. And the whispers grew louder. "Daughter of exile, why have you returned? Does she come to save or condemn? The Duke's child dies, the forest dies, all things die when the covenant breaks. Will she pay the price? Will she offer what we need?" Ilara walked until the forest grew so dense that even twilight couldn't penetrate. She walked until she stood in a clearing she had never seen before, dominated by a tree so massive it defied comprehension. Its trunk was wider than Ravensmoor's castle's great hall. Its branches disappeared into darkness above. Its roots plunged into the earth and spread out like a web, connecting to every other tree in the deep wood. The entire forest, Ilara realized with awe and terror, was essentially one organism. And this ancient giant at its heart was the nexus, the connection point, the guardian itself. "I'm here," she said aloud. Her voice sounded small in the clearing's vast silence. "You called me. You whispered my name for 3 years. I'm here. Speak to me." For a moment, nothing. Then the air shimmered, and something emerged from the tree's trunk like a figure stepping through a doorway. It wore the shape of a woman, but was clearly not human. Its skin was bark brown, traced with patterns like wood grain. Its hair was leaves and moss. Its eyes were the deep green of forest shade, ancient and knowing and utterly without human warmth. The guardian. "Ilara Thorn," it said, and its voice was wind through branches, water over stone, the creak of growing wood. "You survived our embrace. 3 years we sheltered you, fed you, spoke to you. You are ours now, in ways that cannot be undone." I know. Ilara stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run. I felt it, the connection, the way the forest knows me. "And you know us." The guardian circled her slowly, studying. "You learned our language. You heard our songs. You became part of the cycle. When the Duke tore you from human company and threw you to the wild, he gave you to us, and we claimed you. Why?" The question burst out before Ilara could stop it. "Why me? I was nothing, no one, just an inconvenient woman banished to die." "You were perfect." The guardian stopped in front of her, close enough that Ilara could smell earth and green growing things. "The covenant requires balance. For 400 years, the Ravensmore bloodline has taken from us land, timber, game, water. In exchange, we protect their heirs, bind our life to theirs. But this Duke," the guardian's face twisted with something like anger, "this Duke took more than the covenant allowed. He cut the ancient groves. He diverted our streams to water his fields. He broke faith." "So you're killing his son in revenge?" Ilara said flatly. "We are collecting what we are owed. The covenant demands balance. When balance is broken, payment must be made. Thomas is innocent. He's done nothing wrong." "And you were innocent when you were banished," the guardian replied. "Innocence matters little to the powerful when they want something. Why should it matter to us?" The question was so devastatingly accurate that Ilara had no answer. She thought of the trial, the false accusations, her protests of innocence meaning nothing against Lucian's political needs. "But you don't want Thomas to die," she said slowly. "If you did, he'd be dead already. Instead, you're waiting. For what?" "For you." The guardian smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible. "We whispered your name because you are the answer. You understand both worlds, the tame and the wild. You were cast out by the Duke and saved by the forest. You can speak for both. You can restore the balance. How? Become what Thomas was meant to be. Become the bridge between civilization and wilderness. Accept the binding that should have been his. Take it into yourself." Respect, understanding, a voice in the decisions that affect our domain. Ilara stared at the guardian, understanding slowly dawning. "You want me to take Thomas's place in the covenant, to bind myself to the forest instead of him?" "Yes." "For how long?" "For life. Until you die, you would carry the forest's voice. Speak for us in the Duke's councils. Ensure that no more ancient groves are cut without permission, no more sacred streams diverted without discussion. Be our advocate, our representative, our link to the human world we cannot enter. And if I refuse? The guardian's expression didn't change, but the air grew colder. Then Thomas dies, the forest dies, and eventually the duchy falls to ruin as the land itself turns against those who broke faith. We are patient. We can wait generations for the Ravensmore line to end and new people to come who might honor the covenant properly. That's not a choice. That's a threat. It is reality. We are dying, Ilara Thorne. Without the covenant's balance, without someone to bridge the gap between what the Duke takes and what he gives back, we wither. The child withers with us. Choose, and choose quickly. Every moment you hesitate, life drains from both Thomas and the trees. Ilara closed her eyes. She'd come here hoping for answers, and she'd found them. But the price? Binding herself to the forest for life. Becoming some kind of intermediary between wilderness and civilization. Giving up her chance at the normal life she'd hoped to reclaim. The reputation and lands and future she demanded from Lucian. But Thomas, that small fevered child who'd done nothing to deserve this fate, except be born to a father who'd broken ancient oaths. And the forest itself. The deep wood that had sheltered her, taught her, kept her alive when she had every reason to die. She thought about the bargain Lucian had offered, everything she asked for in exchange for saving his son. Reputation, lands, title, everything she'd lost. And she thought about what the Guardian was offering, purpose, connection, a role that mattered. She would never be invisible again. She would be essential, necessary, the living bridge between two worlds. It was a different kind of power than she'd imagined, but perhaps it was one worth having. If I accept, Ilara said slowly, I have conditions. The Guardian tilted its head. Speak them. Thomas goes free, completely. No lingering connection, no possibility of the forest claiming him later if I fail. Agreed. I want authority, real authority. When I speak for the forest in the Duke's councils, my voice carries weight. Not suggestions to be dismissed, but requirements to be honored. This we can ensure. The binding will make you our voice. To ignore you would be to ignore us, and the Duke knows what happens when we are ignored. And I want, Ilara paused, choosing her words carefully. I want freedom within the binding. I won't be a prisoner. I can come and go between castle and forest. I can have a life that isn't entirely consumed by this role. The Guardian was silent for a long moment. Then, this is acceptable. You will be bound to us, but not enslaved. You will carry our voice, but keep your own. You will live between worlds, but belong wholly to neither. Is this what you choose? Was it? Ilara thought of the cottage in the clearing, the years of exile, the invisibility and irrelevance that had defined her before Lucian's betrayal. She thought of the woman she'd been, polite, proper, always trying to be what others wanted. And she thought of the woman she'd become in the deep wood's embrace, strong, capable, unafraid. Yes, she said, I choose this. Then kneel. Ilara knelt on the forest floor, feeling earth and root beneath her knees. The Guardian approached, placing both hands on her head. Where bark touched skin, Ilara felt something ignite, not painful, but intense, like every nerve awakening at once. By root and branch, by stone and stream, by earth and sky, the guardian intoned, I bind you to the deep wood. I make you our voice, our bridge, our human heart. You will speak for us, and we will speak through you. You will carry our life within yours, and your life will sustain ours. From this day until your death, you are both woman and forest, mortal and eternal, tame and wild. Power flooded through Ilara like water breaking through a dam. She felt the forest, all of it, every tree and stream and creature suddenly present in her awareness. She could sense the sickness that had been draining it, could feel Thomas's fading life force entangled with the deep woods dying. And she felt something else, the covenant itself, ancient magic woven through 400 years, now transferring from the child to her. The connection to Thomas severed with an almost audible snap. In that moment, Ilara knew he would wake in his nursery, fever broken, strength returning, saved. And she was no longer entirely human, no longer separate from the forest. She was bound to it, part of it, a living bridge between wilderness and the world of men. The guardian removed its hands, and Ilara swayed, overwhelmed by the rush of sensation. She could feel the entire deepwood now, spreading out in all directions. She could sense its age, its power, its slow return to health now that the covenant was balanced again. It is done, the guardian said. The binding is complete. Thomas will live. The forest will heal. And you, Ilara Thorn, are ours. Ilara stood on trembling legs. She felt different, more solid somehow, more real, as though she'd been a shadow before and was only now gaining substance. What happens now? She asked. Now you return to the castle. You tell the Duke what you have done. And then the guardian smiled that terrible, beautiful smile. Then you teach him what it means to honor the old agreements. You ensure he understands that the forest is not his to command, but his partner in the land's stewardship. You become what you were always meant to be, the voice that speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves. The guardian began to fade, melting back into the ancient tree from which it had emerged. But its voice lingered. You are the forest's heart now, Ilara, and the forest does not forget its own. Then it was gone, and Ilara stood alone in the clearing with the massive tree and the weight of an ancient covenant settling over her shoulders like a mantle. She took a breath and felt the entire forest breathe with her. She closed her eyes and saw through 1,000 trees at once. She listened and heard the whisper of every leaf, the trickle of every stream, the movement of every creature in the deep wood's embrace. She was bound, changed, transformed into something new. And strangely, impossibly, she felt more free than she'd ever been in her life. Ilara turned and began the long walk back to Ravensmoor Castle, back to Lucian and Thomas, and the human world she would now navigate with the forest's voice speaking through her. The deep wood whispered encouragement as she walked, and for the first time in 3 years, Ilara Thorn smiled. Lucian was in the nursery when the miracle happened. Had been sitting vigil for 36 hours, watching Thomas's labored breathing, counting each shallow rise and fall of his son's chest. The physicians had been and gone, offering nothing but sympathy and increasingly dire warnings. The boy was fading, perhaps hours left, certainly no more than days. Marianne sat across the room, her face pale with exhaustion and grief. She'd barely spoken since Thomas's condition had worsened. What was there to say? Their child was dying, and no amount of wealth or title or power could stop it. Then, between one breath and the next, everything changed. Thomas gasped, a deep, full breath unlike any had taken in months. Color flooded back into his cheeks. His fever-hot skin cooled. His eyes opened, clear and focused, no longer clouded with sickness. "Papa?" he said in a voice stronger than Lucian had heard in half a year. Lucian nearly fell out of his chair. "Thomas? Thomas, can you hear me?" "I'm hungry, Papa." The boy sat up, actually sat up on his own, and looked around with bright curiosity. "Where's the tree lady?" "The tree," Lucian's throat closed. "Elara, you mean Elara. She made the trees stop hurting. They were so sad, Papa, but she made them happy again." Marianne rushed to the bed, her hands hovering over Thomas as though afraid to touch him, afraid this was a dream that would shatter at contact. "How do you feel, sweetheart? Does anything hurt?" "No." Thomas looked at his mother with perfect childish honesty. "I feel good. The forest doesn't need me anymore. The tree lady took my place." Lucian felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, took your place?" But Thomas had already lost interest in the conversation, distracted by a toy horse on his bedside table. He was playing with it, making galloping sounds, acting like the healthy 2-year-old he should have been all along. Healed. Completely, impossibly healed. Which meant Elara had succeeded. She'd gone into the deep wood and somehow convinced it to release Thomas from whatever binding had been killing him. But at what price? Lucian stood so abruptly, his chair crashed backward. "Stay with him," he told Marianne. "Watch him. Make sure this is real. I need to—" He didn't finish. He was already running, out of the nursery, through the corridors, down the stairs, shouting for his horse to be saddled. He had to reach the forest, had to find Elara, had to know what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed. "The tree lady took my place." God, what had he done? What had he asked of her? Lucian rode toward the deep wood like a man possessed, pushing his horse harder than he should have. The animal was lathered and blowing by the time they reached the forest's edge, but Lucian barely noticed. He dismounted and plunged into the trees, calling her name. "Elara, Elara, where are you?" The forest that had been silent and dying yesterday now seemed to pulse with renewed life. Leaves rustled, though there was no wind. Branches creaked with voices that almost sounded like words. The air itself felt charged, alive, aware. And then he saw her. She emerged from between the trees like a spirit, like something from legend. She wore the same simple clothes she'd left in, but she moved differently now, with a grace that seemed almost inhuman, her steps perfectly silent on the forest floor. Her eyes, when they met his, were the deep green of forest shade. "Lucian," she said, just his name. Thomas woke. The words tumbled out. He's healed, completely healed, asking for food, playing with toys, acting like he was never sick at all. I know. I felt it when the binding transferred. The binding? Elara, what did you do? What price did you pay? She smiled, and it was nothing like her old smiles. This one held power and knowledge and something wild. I made a choice. I took Thomas' place in the covenant. I'm bound to the forest now, for life. I carry its voice. I speak for it in your councils. I ensure balance is maintained between what you take and what you give back. Lucian felt the world tilt. You bound yourself to the forest. You gave up your freedom. Understanding crashed over him like a wave. Everything I promised you, the lands, the reputation, the life you wanted. You've traded it all to become some kind of forest guardian. I've traded nothing, Ilara corrected. I've gained everything. Power, purpose, a role that matters. I'm not invisible anymore, Lucian. I'm essential. And yes, I'm bound, but I'm also free in ways I never was before. She moved closer, and Lucian saw that she was both the Elora had known and something entirely other. The forest lived in her now. He could see it in the way shadows clung to her, and how the trees seemed to bend slightly in her direction, in the green light that danced at the edges of his vision when he looked at her. "You did this for Thomas," he said, "for my son. I did it for an innocent child, and for the forest that saved my life. And," she paused, "and maybe a little for you. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the exile and the years of suffering, I couldn't let you watch your son die. I'm not that cruel." "You're not cruel at all." Lucian's voice broke. "You're extraordinary. You always were. And I was too blind and too cowardly to see it until I'd already destroyed everything." "Yes," Elora agreed simply. "You were." The honesty of it was devastating. No softening, no pretty lies, just truth, stark and undeniable. "Can you ever forgive me?" Lucian asked. Elora was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those new old eyes. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe someday, but not today. Today, I'm still too angry, too hurt. The forest has healed me in many ways, but it can't erase 3 years of pain and betrayal." "I understand. Do you?" She tilted her head. "Do you understand that even though I saved your son, even though I'm bound to your lands and will spend my life speaking in your councils, you and I will never be what we were? That love, once broken the way you broke ours, doesn't simply mend?" "I understand," Lucian said, though the words felt like glass in his throat. "I gave up any right to your love when I chose duty over you. I know that. I've known it for 3 years." "Good." Elora turned to go, then paused. "I'll return to the castle tomorrow. The Guardian says I need to establish my role, make clear to you and your advisors that the forest's voice must be heard in all decisions affecting the Deepwood. But tonight, I stay here. I need to understand this new thing I've become." "Ilara." Lucian reached for her but stopped himself. "Thank you. For Thomas. For everything. I know it's not enough, but thank you." She looked back at him over her shoulder, and for just a moment he saw a flash of the woman he'd loved, young, vulnerable, uncertain. Then it was gone, replaced by something stronger. "You're right," she said. "It's not enough. But it's a start. Now go back to your son, Duke of Ravensmoor. Celebrate his healing. Hold him close. And remember that the life he lives now was purchased with someone else's freedom. Remember and do better. Be better. Honor the old agreements and forge new ones built on respect rather than exploitation." "I will," Lucian promised. "I swear it." "I'll hold you to that. The forest will hold you to that." She smiled, sharp and knowing. "We're watching now, Lucian. Always watching, and we do not forget." Then she turned and melted into the trees, becoming part of the shadows and green light until Lucian couldn't tell where she ended and the forest began. He stood alone at the deep wood's edge, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over him. Thomas was healed. The forest was healing. But Ilara was lost to him forever, transformed into something he could admire but never possess, love but never hold. It was exactly what he deserved. Lucian mounted his horse and rode slowly back to Ravensmoor, back to his son and his wife and his duties. But part of his heart remained in the forest, with the woman he'd destroyed, and who'd risen from that destruction into something magnificent and terrible and utterly beyond his reach. True to her word, Ilara returned to the castle the next day. She arrived at dawn, walking through the gates with the same silent grace Lucian had noticed in the forest. Guards startled and whispered. Servants crossed themselves. She radiated power now in a way that made even the most hardened soldiers nervous. Lucian met her in the great hall with his council assembled, nobles and advisors who'd helped govern the duchy for years. They looked at Ilara with expressions ranging from confusion to distrust to barely concealed fear. "My lords," Lucian said formally, "allow me to introduce Lady Ilara Thorne. She has been appointed as the Deepwood's representative in our councils. Henceforth, any decisions affecting the forest must be made in consultation with her." The silence that followed was profound. Then Lord Mortimer, the duchy's marshal, spoke up. "Your Grace, with respect, what is this madness? We don't consult with forests. We manage them as resources for the duchy's benefit." "That management," Ilara said quietly, "is why your duke's son nearly died. The forest is not a resource to be exploited, but a partner in the land's stewardship. The covenant your first duke made 400 years ago requires balance. I am here to ensure that balance is maintained." "Covenant?" Lady Ashworth, the duchy's treasurer, looked skeptical. "This sounds like superstition and folklore, not serious policy." Ilara raised her hand, and the room's temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Frost formed on the windows. The torches flickered and dimmed. Every person in the great hall felt it. The forest's power, focused and deliberate, speaking through the woman who now served as its voice. "Does this feel like superstition?" Ilara asked. The frost melted as quickly as it had formed, the temperature returning to normal. But the message was clear. The council members exchanged nervous glances. Lucian stepped forward. "Lady Ilara speaks with the Deepwood's authority. Her voice in these councils is not advisory, but binding." This is not a request or a suggestion, but a fundamental change in how we govern these lands. The forest is alive, aware, and willing to work with us, but only if we honor the agreements our ancestors made. "And if we refuse?" Lord Mortimer asked, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. Ilara smiled, and it was the Guardian's terrible smile. "Then you lose your duke's heir and watch your duchy wither as the land turns against you. The choice, as always, is yours." No one argued further. The meeting that followed was tense but productive. Ilara laid out new terms. Any logging would be approved by her first, with replanting requirements. Stream diversions would require consultation to ensure the forest's water needs were met. Hunting of sacred animals, she provided a list, was forbidden entirely. In exchange, the forest would continue to protect the Ravensmore bloodline and provide sustainable resources for the duchy's needs. It was negotiation, not exploitation. Partnership, not domination. By the time the council adjourned, the balance had shifted. Lucian was still duke, but Ilara held power in her own right. The power of speaking for something ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to human hierarchies. Afterward, Lucian found her in the castle gardens, looking out toward the Deepwood. "You handled them well," he said. "I didn't handle them. I spoke truth, and they chose to listen. There's a difference." She glanced at him. "How is Thomas?" "Perfect. Healthy. He asks about you constantly, the tree lady who made the forest happy again." Something soft crossed Ilara's face. "He's a sweet child. I'm glad he's well. Thanks to you. Thanks to the choice I made, yes. She turned to face him fully. Lucian, we need to talk about the practical details of this arrangement. I'll need rooms in the castle. I can't live in the forest entirely, not if I'm to attend councils and negotiations. But I also need freedom to come and go. To spend time in the deep wood when the forest needs me there. You'll have the East Tower, the entire thing if you want it, furnished however you prefer, and complete freedom. I'll instruct the guards that you're not to be questioned or delayed, coming or going. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence. There was so much unsaid between them, so much history and hurt and broken promises, but also something new, the beginning of respect, perhaps, recognition of each other as equals rather than duke and discarded lover. Ilara, Lucian began, then stopped. I want you to know, I meant what I said about restoring your reputation. The official decree of your banishment has been rescinded. I've sent letters to every noble house declaring that the charges against you were false, made in error during a time of political turmoil. Your honor is restored. Political turmoil? Ilara's laugh was bitter. Is that what we're calling it? I'm calling it what my advisors will accept, but the truth, the real truth, is that I was a coward who sacrificed you to appease factions demanding I marry for political alliance rather than love, and I've regretted it every day since. Regret is easy. Amends are harder. But Ilara's voice had softened fractionally. Still, I accept the restoration of my reputation. It will make my work here easier if people don't see me as a convicted traitor. About the lands I promised you. Keep them. Lucian blinked. What? I don't need lands of my own. I have the entire Deepwood now, in a sense. What good would a manor and estate do me when I'm bound to the forest? Ilara shrugged. Besides, accepting your lands would make me beholden to you. I prefer to stand on my own. Then at least accept a stipend. You'll need money for what? I wear simple clothes, eat simple food, need nothing elaborate. The forest provides most of what I require. She paused. Though I suppose some funds would be useful for books, correspondence, the occasional luxury.
Very well. A modest allowance. Nothing excessive. You're the forest's voice in a duke's council. You should be compensated accordingly. I didn't do this for money, Lucian. I know, but accept it anyway. For practical purposes, if nothing else. Ilara considered, then nodded. Very well, for practical purposes. They fell silent again, watching the sun climb higher. It was strange, this new dynamic between them. Not lovers, not enemies. Something in between. Something undefined. Can I ask you something? Lucian said finally. You may ask, I may not answer. Do you hate me? Ilara was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't respond. Then, no. I did for a while. But hate requires energy I couldn't spare when I was trying to survive. So I let it burn out and left only emptiness, or what I thought was emptiness. But the forest filled it, gave me purpose, made me into something new. She looked at him. So no, I don't hate you. I'm angry still, hurt still. But hate? No. You don't deserve that much of my emotion. It was devastating in its honesty. Lucian nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. You asked for truth. I gave it. That's what we do now, isn't it? Trade truth instead of pretty lies. Build something honest, even if it's painful. Is that what we're doing? Building something? I don't know yet. Ilara turned to go. Ask me in a year, when I've had time to understand what this new life means. When we've worked together long enough to see if partnership is possible. Then maybe I'll have an answer.
She walked away, leaving Lucian in the garden with sunlight and questions, and the beginning, just the beginning, of something.